There are several ways to measure a nation's power. You can look at their military and compare it with others. Or you can examine their GDP and economic growth, since an effective military needs a lot of resources to function. You might also use soft power or influence as a measure. Even if not everyone knows where Tokyo is, they definitely know what anime is. Or you can be the United States and simply say yes to all of them. With a gargantuan military budget of more than $900 billion, more than the next 10 countries combined, supported by an equally massive GDP of over $27 trillion, about a quarter of the entire world's economy. Add in enough soft power to call it hard power. The world is deeply interested in what the US is doing, and practically everyone on Earth knows what McDonald's is. That means America can secretly attack every nation on Earth with cholesterol. All of that military might, economic strength, and global influence have turned the US into the superpower we know today, and it has used that status accordingly. After World War II, the US helped dictate that colonization was no longer acceptable, ushering in an era of international rule-based order, making territorial conquest illegal under international law, which definitely stopped nations like China or Russia from invading their neighbors. Sarcasm intended. But the point is, when you're a superpower, you make the rules. Looking back through history, every superpower has dictated what international norms to follow. The US promotes its rule-based order, the USSR spread communism across the world, the British Empire banned the global slave trade, and the Spanish Empire, arguably the first true global empire, spread its religion and culture worldwide. When you're a superpower, you set the rules. So today, I'm going to talk about superpowers. First, some context. What is a superpower, and why are they called that? Then we'll look at examples of past superpowers, such as the USSR, the British Empire, and the Spanish Empire, and examine why they deserve the title superpower instead of merely great power, based on their influence and ability to project power. Finally, we'll discuss the emerging superpower from the East, China. Over the past few decades, China has experienced a meteoric rise and now stands as a real contender to sit beside the US as a nation capable of shaping global politics. The term superpower was first coined in 1944 during World War II, applied to the United States, the Soviet Union, and the British Empire. A superpower is a nation with a dominant position that can exert influence and project power on a global scale. This dominance is supported by the combination of military, economic, technological, and political strength, enhanced through diplomacy and soft power. And of course, superpowers never act alone. They have allies. It's great to be an overpowered character in a video game, but it's even better when you've got NPCs to act as your meat shields. Even though the term superpower was coined in 1944, there's an argument to be made for earlier empires holding that status. Take the Spanish Empire, for example. At its height, Spain controlled vast territories across North and South America, the Philippines, and even a small part of Africa. They also extracted silver, a lot of silver. Nearly 150,000 tons of it were shipped back home to fund their war machine. In fact, they brought back so much that Spain suffered from severe inflation, as the flood of silver diluted their purchasing power. As the first true global empire, Spain conquered the Aztecs, the Incas, and later the Maya in the Americas. Despite being almost always outnumbered, Spain managed to win through clever diplomacy and technological advantages. During the conquest of the Aztecs, for instance, the conquistadors were supported by neighboring tribes who despised the Aztecs. Turns out, being a warmongering civilization that sacrifices your enemies for religious reasons isn't exactly great for your friend count. Often, the Spanish forces numbered only in the hundreds or low thousands, supported by tens of thousands of native allies determined to bring down the Aztecs. Spain was also quite lucky, because their supposed technological advantage wasn't that impressive. Sure, they had cannons and firearms, but their effectiveness was, frankly, terrible. The arquebus of that era took anywhere from 20 seconds to a full minute to reload under ideal conditions, and battlefield conditions were anything but ideal. What really helped Spain, besides diplomacy and luck, was the same grim factor that later helped European colonization in North America: disease. Smallpox ravaged the Aztecs, and as far as we know, smallpox patients make terrible soldiers. The Spanish Empire used its newfound wealth from the New World, especially silver, to fund costly wars in continental Europe, fighting in France, Germany, and the Netherlands, often suffering massive casualties. Then they had a brilliant idea. Since we have so much silver from the New World, let's just borrow money from the banks. We'll pay them back after the next shipment arrives. Spoiler alert, terrible idea. The Spanish crown repeatedly defaulted on its debts to foreign banks until no one was willing to lend them money anymore. The shipments of silver were unreliable, and when they did arrive, the funds were mismanaged and poured into endless wars instead of building a sustainable local economy. In the end, the Spanish Empire declined not because of external invasion, but due to internal mismanagement. Wealth remained concentrated among the elites while the broader population gained little. Massive government debt eroded trust, and by the time Spain realized the depth of its problems, it was too late. They lost control of their colonies, fell into economic crisis, and faded into history. Definitely not foreshadowing anything about our current era. Next, we have the British Empire. At its height, Britain controlled roughly 24% of the world's landmass, earning it the famous moniker, the Empire on which the sun never sets. There's a running joke that the British are the reason so many nations have Independence Days. Their map drawing skills were so impressive that the lines they drew still cause conflict today. The Israel-Palestine conflict? British fault. The partition of India and Pakistan? Also British. The only place free from British cartographic chaos is Antarctica, and only because they never got around to drawing lines there. Using its colonies and its formidable navy, then the most powerful in the world, the British pretty much controlled global trade and could invade wherever and whenever they wanted. The American War of Independence would likely have been lost if France hadn't bankrupted itself, fighting the British on behalf of the young United States. A perfect example of how spite can be powerful enough to make you go broke just to see your enemy stumble. So, what did the British Empire do after becoming the next superpower? They got rich, of course. The Indian subcontinent provided a massive source of wealth and manpower. They humiliated the Qing dynasty by forcing China to import opium, something China later repaid by sending fentanyl to the US instead of the UK, for some reason. Then, Britain set the international rules. Colonization was perfectly fine, as long as you didn't mess with other great powers or upset the balance of power. Oh, and no more slavery. The slavery ban was a big deal. It showed that the British Empire wasn't just powerful, but also morally progressive. Just kidding. Yes, there was an abolitionist movement in Britain, but the real reason was that they no longer needed slaves. The steam engine was far more efficient than 100 human laborers. So by banning slavery, Britain claimed the moral high ground while simultaneously crippling the economies of its rivals. And to their credit, they did enforce the ban quite seriously. The British Empire began to decline after World War II, though it didn't completely lose its superpower status until around the 1950s. One by one, its colonies slipped away, thanks in part to the new superpower on the block, the United States. Eventually, the British Empire collapsed and became what we now know as simply the United Kingdom. Next, we have the USA and the USSR. The first time in history, two superpowers of comparable strength faced off. On one side, you had the US spreading capitalism and democracy, as long as you politely ignored all the dictators they installed across various continents. On the other side stood the Soviet Union, spreading its own brand of communism. Other types of communism were banned, and those who tried got a visit from the tanks. Here, the US tried to set the rules, an international, rule-based order. But it didn't work, because the Soviets wanted to make their own rules, a Soviet sphere free from Western influence, with surrounding nations serving as obedient vassal states. The two sides clashed across the globe, in Vietnam, in South America, in Korea. Troops were deployed, but neither dared invade the other's territory directly. Nuclear weapons were now in play, and one wrong move could trigger a double suicide that would take the whole world with it. Then suddenly, something happened. The Soviet Union collapsed, not just because of external pressure, but due to internal mismanagement. Wealth stayed concentrated among the elites, while the general population got little. Government oppression eroded public trust, especially in the satellite states like Poland, the Baltic countries, and Ukraine. When the Soviet Union finally crumbled, those states immediately bailed. The Soviet government tried to reform, but it was too late. They lost control of their vassal states, suffered an economic collapse, and faded into the modern Russian Federation, no longer a superpower. The pattern was eerily similar to the fall of the Spanish Empire, and definitely not reminiscent of the current superpower, the United States. Now, the US stands as the sole superpower and sets the rules. We have the international rule-based order. Invasions are a no-no and are condemned by most of the world. This ushered in an era of relative peace, especially among developed nations. You have to understand how exceptional this period is. Throughout most of history, prosperous nations expanded by conquering others. But in this modern age, great powers stopped doing that. Well, at least until Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. While not a direct clash between great powers, it became a proxy war, with Ukraine backed by Western nations. Ironically, if South Korea decided to send troops to help Ukraine, like North Korea did for Russia, it would turn into a proxy war between both Koreas. To become a superpower, a nation needs a rock-solid foundation. The United States fits that description perfectly, and honestly, I'd argue they have plot armor. Think about it. Who in their right mind would allow a country to form that can feed itself and the rest of the world, is rich in minerals and energy resources, has friendly neighbors, so it doesn't need to worry about invasion, and is conveniently separated from everyone else by two massive oceans? It's the most overpowered nation on Earth, bar none. Of all the great powers today, China is the one with the potential to grow into a true superpower. They've got the manpower, the economy, and the technological base. But there's a catch. Their foundation isn't as strong as it looks. Their manpower? Enormous, yes, but heavily skewed toward men because of the one-child policy. It's not uncommon to see a single man supporting 6 people, his parents and grandparents. Their economy? Far too dependent on exports. Their technology base? Largely built on copied or stolen tech, meaning they'll always be one step behind the innovators. That said, if China plays its cards right, it can still become a superpower. You don't need to be as overpowered as the US to join the club. You just have to be good enough. China could easily dominate the Asian sphere if it rises to superpower status. Who needs diplomatic justification when your Dongfeng missiles can speak for you? But when it comes to soft power, China is still lagging far behind. Sure, their internet bots might win a few arguments online, but let's be honest, their politicians are terrible at the internet. And those same old-school politicians around the world? They don't like China. They know how Beijing operates, and they'll do everything they can to block its ambitions, unless China can somehow persuade or pressure them to take its side. And that's not even counting US intervention, as if America would just sit back and relax while a new superpower starts flexing. The US still has plenty of strength and plenty of friends to make China's life difficult. If China embargoes the US, consumer goods prices will skyrocket in America. But if the US embargoes China, it could cripple China's economy entirely. Having the majority of your economic engine based on exporting goods to your rival isn't exactly the best strategy. Only through smart, cautious planning and a fair bit of luck can China truly rise to superpower status. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.